St. Peter makes this really remarkable statement in today's gospel to Jesus. He says, "Everyone is looking for you." Everyone is looking for you. Jesus had made a lasting impression upon them by healing the sick and by driving out demons, so much so that his fame had spread far and wide, and everyone wanted to come and to see him. And so when he moves on, they follow him. And then what we hear in the gospel is actually quite remarkable too. Not only are people looking for him, he is also searching for them. He's going from town to town, from village to village. These weren't giant cities, and looking for people to preach the gospel to. So their desire and his desire met together. He was not like a spiritual guru who would stay on a mountaintop somewhere waiting for people to come to see him. He didn't sit in the synagogue in Capernaum and wait for people to eventually make their way to him. He went in search of them. Everyone is looking for you. And this statement echoes even to our own day, because we are looking for him in our heart of hearts, in our desires, because he has the truth that saves. And he has the love that satisfies the longing of our hearts. And so today we look for him, but he also looks for us. And the way that he does that today is through the church. The church continues the work of his incarnation, of his saving redemption. And so God has chosen to make need of each one of us. You see, he could have sent angels to spread the gospel message. Wouldn't that be something? If we showed up on Sunday mornings and instead of listening to poor old me, there would be like an angel here speaking to us. They would have had quite something to say, but this is not what God chose to do. He could speak to people directly by enlightening their minds, but he didn't choose to do that either. He chose to make need of us. And so we have the responsibility of taking the message to the people that are looking for it. And this is our responsibility. And St. Paul said in today's second reading, he said, "An obligation has been laid upon me. Woe to me if I do not preach the gospel message." Woe to me, because people are looking for the message that we have. So I think there are three characteristics that we need to accomplish this mission of Jesus that Jesus entrusts to us. First of all, we need conviction. We need to be convinced that the message that we offer is the one that people need to hear. It would be like a doctor who has found the cure for some disease and is convinced that this will help people, and then they go around and tell people about that cure. Well, we have to be utterly convinced that the message of Jesus' incarnation and salvation and redemption is what people need to hear. Because when we lose this conviction, then there's no reason for us to pass it on to others. There's no reason. And we need to have this conviction with humility, not with some sort of arrogance and pride. It is a gift that's given to us, an obligation that has been laid upon us to share this. But we have to be convinced that this is what people need to hear. The second thing is we need perseverance, because in the work of spreading the gospel, there is no overnight success. We shouldn't expect things to change very quickly, because even in our own lives, we know that change happens very slowly. It's like planting a seed in the ground and watering it and waiting and waiting and waiting for it to develop. So we have to be persevering. And we also need to expect failures in this work, because, as St. Paul says, we preach Christ crucified, which is a stumbling block to the Jews and folly to the Gentiles. And so there are people that will reject the message and that will think that we are foolish for sharing it. And furthermore, no one has ever or will ever preach the message with such conviction and certitude and attractiveness as Jesus did. And still, Jesus didn't convince everyone. When he went around spreading the message, there were still people with hard hearts that would not listen to him. The last thing that we need is to become all things to all. This is the principle that St. Paul lays out for us. He said, "To the weak I became weak, and to all I became a slave." So we have to adapt ourselves to what people need. We have to first listen and see where they're at and meet them there. As Jesus went around village to village to go and meet people, we have to see where people are at and meet them where they are and take them further along. It's like this image that Pope Francis gives of a field hospital. He said, when you drag people into the field hospital, you don't really check their cholesterol or their blood sugars because they have serious wounds. You have to address those first before addressing everything else. And in our work of spreading the message of Jesus, we have to reach people where they are and then bring them along and not try to do everything at once. But one thing that won't be successful is by offering people half-truths. We can't tell them that the gospel message is easy. We can't water down or ignore parts of what Jesus says. We have to give them the whole truth. Maybe not right away, but eventually they need to hear all of that. And so to conclude, I'd like to share the story of a saint named Paul Miki, whose feast day we celebrated yesterday, whose life and martyrdom exhibits the qualities that we need to share the message of Christ. In the year 1549, St. Francis Xavier, who was Portuguese, left and went to Asia. And eventually he made his way to Japan. And there he started to spread the gospel. And one of the families that became Christian was St. Paul Miki's family. And he became one of the first native Japanese priests of that island. And he became a Jesuit, and he started to preach the gospel message to his own people. Well, the winds of favor went away, and the emperor, the Japanese emperor, decided to persecute the Christians. So in 1597, he arrested St. Paul Miki and 25 others, and he took them to the city of Nagasaki, which you will probably recall from modern history. And they took them there, and they tied them all to crosses, and they raised them up. They tied them to the cross. And there, St. Paul Miki spoke to the people that gathered, because people started coming to see what is going on. What have they done to these Christians? And the person who witnessed this said that it was the most noble pulpit that St. Paul Miki ever filled. And tied to the cross, he said, "This is the supreme moment of my life, and why would I have any reason to lie to you?" That's a good question. When you're tied to the cross, knowing that you only have moments to live, why would you lie to anyone? That's what he said. And then he said, "I tell you very plainly, there is no other way to be saved except the Christian way. There is no other way to be saved except the Christian way." And then he said, "Jesus taught us to forgive. And so I forgive the emperor and all who have sought my death. And I beg them to be baptized and to become Christians themselves." And then he encouraged his brothers and sisters that were also tied up on the crosses. And the soldiers took spears and ended their life, martyring those 26 people. St. Paul Miki had all three things that I mentioned. He had conviction. He knew that the message that he was offering was what people needed to hear, because they were looking for Jesus, whether they knew it or not. He did it with perseverance, even if it meant martyrdom, all the way to the very end. And he did it according to what they needed. He spoke very plainly and told them, "There is no other way. Please be baptized." So he exhibits what we ought to do to share the message of Christ and to fulfill our obligation that we have. The world hungers and thirsts for God, and our friends, our relatives, and our acquaintances, even those who are furthest off, they too, in their heart, desire Jesus, even if they don't know it, and even if it's hidden to themselves, or they don't show it to us. So we ought to have conviction and perseverance and meet them where they're at and share this message that can save. So may God give us the grace to have zeal and concern for others and share the gospel as the apostles did and as St. Paul Miki did, so that it might bear fruit in other people's lives as well.